Hello, I'm Paul Johnson with the Optimistic American. The purpose of our show is to try and help give you optimism so that you can regain your sense of agency. In this program, we're going to talk about our new book that Dr. Bashah and I have written called Addictive Ideologies. Addictive Ideologies takes a look at what happened in Iraq with the Ba'ath Party and Saddam Hussein, the brutal murders that he committed inside of his country, and how that's been reflected in other brutal dictatorships. But the real purpose in giving you back your sense of agency is to help you understand the role that you play in that process as well. Now that, again, is what this podcast really is all about, not just this one, but our series. It's trying to help give you back your sense of agency so your life becomes empowered. And there's no doubt in our mind that, being optimistic doesn't mean that you ignore the problems, but the people who are going to solve the problems are the ones who believe that they can. Giving you back your sense of empowerment, your ability to create and to innovate, comes from that optimism. So if you want to see us continue our work, we request that you push that subscribe button on wherever it is that you get your favorite podcast. All right, so now we're on with our show with Dr. Emily Bashah. Dr. Bashah, welcome to the Optimistic American again. I hope you're having a good day.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, so we want to talk a little bit about our new book today, Addictive Ideologies. But one of the things that became clear in writing that book with you is that you have an immense amount of experience with people who have been, let's just say, on the darker side of life, people who've been involved with capital crimes, terrorists, people who've committed murders, and all different types of heinous crimes. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start with a little bit of an understanding about what you've seen. And most specifically, I'd like to talk about psychopathy, the idea of psychotic killers.
Yeah, psychopathy is really grossly misunderstood. A lot of people in layman's terms will say, oh my gosh, that person's a psychopath or a sociopath, without really understanding what that term means. And there's actually a lot of research and organized definitions and operationalized definitions to help us label people with these certain personality constructs. Now, I should say that in our diagnostic and statistical manual, we do not have a diagnosable disorder for psychopathy or psychopathic personality disorder. But having said that, we do have tools and constructs to help us explain and identify somebody with a full-blown psychopathy or psychopathology or psychopathic traits or tendencies. What that is somebody with superficial charm. They have this glibness, but you see that there's superficiality to their emotions. They may show some fluctuating emotions, but they really have a lack of empathy and a disregard for social norms. They're driven by their own motivations, and they'll be willing to manipulate and con and deceive and take advantage and hurt others without a sense of remorse or guilt or shame for doing so. And when they try to offer rationale or reasons for their actions, it really sounds like they're blaming or externalizing others as though they deserved it, or they were just defending themselves. There's just some kind of quick reactionary defense for their behaviors, but without really appreciating or showing any kind of in-depth appreciation or insight. They do have narcissistic tendencies, but they really don't care for the admiration of others. They're not driven by that. They may be driven by power, or they have a perceived goal or intended goal in mind, and they're willing to run over who and whatever they need to in order to get that. I should also say that not all killers or people convicted of murder have psychopathy or have psychopathic traits or tendencies, and not all people who are psychopaths turn out to be killers. So they might be CEOs and very successful
Politicians.
and politicians of companies and things like that.
Got to do something.
But here's some things, some statistics. Psychopaths or people who really meet the full criteria, probably are less than 1% of our population. Some statistics are saying it's like 0.06% of our population. So they're lower in comparison to people with full-blown, like, meeting criteria for antisocial personality disorder, which is a diagnosable personality disorder. We're looking at something around 10%, which is probably the majority of people in our criminal justice system might have some traits or tendencies, and may meet full criteria for that disorder. So there is some overlapping symptoms between people with antisocial personality disorder, which is diagnosable, with people who develop full psychopathy in life. And we look at patterns across the lifetime. So somebody who in childhood is torturing animals, or they have behavioral problems and conduct problems, they're impulsive, to an extreme version. There is poor behavioral controls that they're exhibiting. They have that lack of empathy or sense of responsibility for what they do. They're constantly having school or social or peer problems with little change. And so now you start to see that this is more of a personality construct that is really developed and solidified over time. There's some fascinating neuroscience research that looks into the developing brain and into adulthood, that there are some anomalies in the way that the brain organically is developing over time and into adulthood. And there's even been some studies to show that there's genetic predispositional traits that people can inherit.
So would you guess that people who are psychopaths, is it genetic, is it nature or nurture?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and something that is constantly disputed among researchers today. And I think that the answer would most likely be both. And so on the other side, researchers also look at, well, just because they have these genetic predispositions and organic brain anomalies, not all of those people go on to develop psychopathy. And then that is lent to the nurture debate. And so there are links looking at prenatal exposure to toxins. So if a mother is abusing substances, and then you're getting that exposure in utero, that can affect brain development. And then looking at early forms of attachment to caregivers, if there's an insecure form of attachment that gets developed, if the child is abandoned or doesn't have that emotional connection, where they feel like the caregivers emotionally are attuned to their needs, that can also lead to a poor sense of understanding emotionally and fostering that empathic connection and regard for others. If there's exposure to chronic forms of violence or acute forms of violence, that can also perpetuate some of these traits and tendencies over time. So, I have some examples that I think, in cases where I've been meeting with different people who
I'd love to hear those.
Yeah, committed of murder or pled guilty to murder or were in trial and sentencing for murder. And throughout my evaluations, it's rare, but I have a few cases that really come to mind where I think something's wrong.
All right, so before we do this, let me just make certain that I define the terms a little bit. So there are overlapping traits of both narcissists and psychopaths. They're overlapping, but they're not necessarily the same, with one of the key differences is a narcissist is somewhat has empathy. They can have empathy for other people or an understanding of what they want. They're just more centered on themselves, whereas the psychopath is missing that ability to have empathy for them. And then on antisocial, as I understand what you're saying, all psychopaths are antisocial, but all antisocial people aren't necessarily psychopaths. And if that's true, define for me what antisocial actually means.
Yes, you did a really good job of summarizing. I would just want to tweak one thing that you said there, that narcissists have empathy. I don't know if I would go so far as to say that. I think they're really good at being a chameleon, and they probably understand they have emotional intelligence, and they understand emotions better than psychopaths. And ultimately, their goal is this grandiosity. It always has to come back to them. There is this need for admiration. These are the people that, if you're making love to them, they're looking at themselves in the mirror. That they want to see their own reflection in you.
That's the narcissist.
That's the narcissist. So they have a higher degree of conscientiousness, which is an adaptable trait, but they use it to, again, manipulate others to ultimately come back to themselves. Psychopaths, they couldn't be bothered, with all of that. Ultimately, they're just driven by whatever their goal is, and they don't really have that emotional intelligence. I mean, they'll have enough to be able to con and manipulate you, but they definitely don't have that higher degree of conscientiousness that narcissists have. So that's one of the differentiations, I would say. Now, going back to your other question, what is antisocial personality disorder? So that is diagnosable. So these are, again, if it's a personality disorder, we're starting to see these long-term pervasive patterns. So it starts from like late childhood. You start to see some of these adolescent conduct problems. They may have problems with their peers, with school truancy, maybe drug use or substance use, or addictions that are developing. They have a disregard for social norms and authority, constantly defying authority. So you see these patterns developing over time. And then in adulthood, they'll start to defy legal norms. So they're starting to get into problems with the law. And there, again, is this lack of empathy and remorse.
Okay. So examples, you said you had some examples for us.
Yeah. So I remember sitting across from a person who had was charged with killing a family member.
You're sitting across from them because you're doing an evaluation.
And I'm doing an evaluation with them in jail. And so I'm asking about their life history, and I have access to all these records. And so, my review and a comprehensive analysis of a person isn't just based on what they're telling me. It's also my training. I'm understanding their mental status. I'm observing their behavioral observations, usually in the room with them for 6 to 8 hours. So it can be a very exhausting process. I'm constantly looking for consistencies and inconsistencies between what they're telling me, what I know from the records, what they've told me earlier in the day versus what they're telling me later in the day. And so there's a lot of things that measure to help produce some reliability. I also do collateral interviews with different family members or spouses. And so there are a lot of things that go into the evaluation. And then I'm relying also on psychometric testing and psychological testing that has built-in validity measures and reliability measures in and of itself. So all of that in totality helps. But here I am doing this evaluation, and this person is describing how they killed their family member, almost as if they were like describing them doing the laundry. And it was just total flat affect. And there was really this complete disregard that this person is no longer living. Like the finality of this person's death really had no impact whatsoever on this person that I was evaluating. And I can appreciate people being in a state of shock after a trauma like that. But this was not the case. This is how this person responds to situations and has responded to situations over time. There was just a complete disregard and appreciation for the finality of the act, that this person can no longer have another conversation with this family member. Like, there's no more interactions that this person can have with a family member. A complete disregard and lack of appreciation that this family member is no longer alive to serve and be present for other people. Everything really focused and centered on the self and the rationale for the act. And even in listening to some of the records, some of the audio recordings from the record, it was consistent that even at the time of the offense, there was just this general disregard and very shallow, flat affect. And so I would assume for someone going through that there might be a sense of shock, like a traumatic shock, like what just happened. If somebody was acting impulsively or irrationally and things just happened in the heat of the moment. But this wasn't the case, not for this person.
All right. So have you ever dealt with somebody who, after they committed the act, actually were happy that they did, or that expressed to you that it was something that they not only weren't ashamed of, but that they were proud of?
Yes, it was one of my earlier cases that I was still doing while working under supervision of a mentor. And I just recall thinking, oh, I wish this person was really shackled to the ground right now. I did not feel
what
safe.
Happened?
This person was quite hostile and aggressive with me. I think this respondent particularly didn't appreciate that I was a female, particularly didn't appreciate that I was younger, and that I also had some authority, more authority and power than this respondent would have preferred given the situation.
The fact that you had more power bothered him.
Yes.
Even though it was just the power of somebody doing an interview.
Yes. Yes. But there were glimpses to his personality that would come through when you're spending 6 to 7 hours with somebody consistently. I mean, with bathroom breaks, but consistently, their true nature is revealed. I think it's so hard to be an actor for that long. And
so we keep the show to an hour, the longest I can do it.
Because otherwise I'll see through it, or other people might see through it. Let's just be honest. I remember, so this person at one point was boasting about a completely different crime in which this respondent had orchestrated a different murder, and which had nothing to do with the current charges that I was evaluating this person for. And so I found it quite surprising that a person wouldn't necessarily have that degree of awareness or conscientiousness, but then to go to that level of boasting about it, to me, I think showed his true nature.
Mm-hmm. Why would he boast about it? What's
he
he getting
proud.
out of that?
He was proud. Yeah, it was. He had a vendetta, and there, this person had described some of the reasons and the rationale, and it was a revenge killing.
Mm-hmm. And when that happens, I mean, how would you diagnose that? Is that a part of psychopathy?
Yes, I would say it is. Again, it meets a lot of the criteria. And I want to say, like, just taking a simple test online, I know that those are available, are not enough to diagnose psychopathy. Even if you were to look up all the different symptoms and signs, there's just so many other things, like with the clinical interview, review of records, interviewing of collateral people, and my trained behavioral observations. I mean, all of these things are taken in totality. Mm-hmm. But I would say that this person, and they're very few, I would say probably throughout all the years I've been doing this, there's probably 2 people, maybe 3, that really come to mind that I think, okay, these people definitely met criteria for psychopathy.
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time in elective office, and I've dealt with lots of politicians at the congressional, presidential, council levels, state government level. And I've also dealt with lots of advocates on the outside, and I began to kind of develop a hypothesis or a theory. But there's no doubt, I'm convinced some of them were psychopaths. Now, if the percentage of psychopaths in the country are 1%, or in the world are 1%, there are estimates that among CEOs that it can be anywhere from 4 to 12%, people who are in business. In my experience, I haven't found that many people in business that I thought were. I met one or two, but not very many. But I met quite a few involved in politics. And I'm going to give you kind of my definition of it, because I'm certainly not a trained psychologist. So my view came just from my experience and my reading. My theory is this: power is defined by the desire to gain influence. That's how power is defined. And as a definition, that's something we all want. We all want the ability to influence people. If you're a parent, you want the ability to influence your child. All right, that's a sense of power that you have over them. If you're in business, or if you're a manager working for a business, you want the ability to influence the people who work for you. If you're in politics, you want to be able to influence not only your constituents, but other people who are on the council or in the legislature, or who are in Congress. The desire to influence is one form of power. Oftentimes, we describe that as what power is. But what happens when you have that type of power is you also, on purpose or inadvertently, hurt people. As a parent, if you ground your child or take their phone from them, they're going to believe that you hurt them. Now, you might be doing it for their own good, but nonetheless, you're harming them. You're having a negative effect on them. In business, if you have to fire someone, you're going to harm them. Or if you demote them, or if you let them have 2 weeks off without pay, or any of those things can be harmful to them. You have to do that sometimes as an employer. And in politics, the same is true also. In fact, in politics, it's even more exacerbated, because what happens in politics is almost every single decision hurts someone. Politics is the place that we go to work out our problems, right? Now, those problems can be: where are we going to build the freeway? How are we going to deal with the pro-choice, pro-life debate? How are we going to deal with the issue of zoning, or where a police station is going to go, or how many police officers we're going to have, and how are we going to tax for it? Whatever the issue is, there's always someone in that process who gets hurt constantly. What I found is, and I again, this is a hypothesis. My hypothesis was there are some people who want power to influence people, and they inadvertently, because of having that power, have to sometimes inflict pain. There are a few people who inflicting the pain is all they're really after. It is the desired effect. They are looking for power to be able to inflict pain, because that's part of gaining control.
Can I ask you a question?
Oh, sure.
So do you have examples in your personal experience in politics where you've been in positions that you've had to make decisions politically that have hurt other people? Do you have an example of that?
Oh, gosh, all the time.
And then have you also seen or witnessed the latter, the second part, where you've seen people in politics that they somehow enjoyed, they had that sadistic nature and enjoyed inflicting pain on others?
So every day in politics, I had to hurt someone. I never liked it. I sometimes would justify it. I would justify why it was that I had done what I had done. Now, the pain might be this. We have to decide where freeway is going to go. And the freeway is either going to go in location A, B, or C. If you don't build the roadway, there's going to be a pain to people who are driving cars, and there's going to be a pain to pollution, and there's going to be a pain that comes from traffic congestion. But if you do build the freeway, you may have an effect on someone's life when you say, hey, we have to move you. Or even worse, no, we're not going to move you. You're just going to be left next to this freeway. Those people, they suffer real pain. And what I found in being a politician was that in having to deal with that, it wasn't easy. It was there were many times that I thought long and hard about what I had done, and was it the right thing, and did we make the right decision? And now I always believe that I did my best to try to make the right decision for the right reason, but it doesn't matter. Even if you hurt people inadvertently, it has an effect on you. And what people start to tell you is, look, you need to be able to isolate that. You need to be able to move that to the side and to not allow that to affect you. You made the best decision that you could. Move on. All right. And my answer to that is, I think you should be careful about losing your humanity. The fact that you hurt people, even though you did it inadvertently, it's okay to feel bad about that.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's something I often work with in my clinic with clinical populations. There is also the ethics and morality of our decision making, and oftentimes choices are not so clean cut. And we have to do like a cost benefit analysis. And sometimes we have to look at short-term goals versus long-term goals. And I can mention that many of our leaders and nations leaders and forefathers of our nation had to be put up against the same things, and making some determinations of this may not be helpful short-term, but ultimately it's part of this longer-term vision. And people are going to have to die in order to preserve something that is going to help future generations. I may not even live to see it. Mm-hmm. So the other thing was that you brought up was guilt. Guilt is a very adaptive emotion. And for people who don't have guilt, then we're starting to see them more as like in that antisocial, psychopathic tendencies and in that realm. Guilt adjusts behaviors. If you didn't have guilt at the end of the night, before you're going to sleep and you're really confronted with your own consciousness, I'd be concerned about you. And it causes us to rethink and reshape and adjust where there needs to be adjustments in our life.
Mm-hmm. Now, the second part of your question, did I meet people who enjoyed it? Not a lot, but in politics, I definitely met some who they loved being in that position where they knew that they could hurt someone. And they began to divide up the world between the people who were their friends and the people that were their enemies. And they, I would hear all the time from them things like, if you have to have a reward, but you have to have a stick as well. The stick is important. But it was clear with some of them, they liked that stick a little bit too much. They enjoyed the pain. What would happen, interestingly enough, is that person could probably be manipulated easier than people who were more balanced, because all you had to do was to feed that ego, feed their power, feed their strength, feed their desire to be able to implement the pain, work together collaboratively to target where that pain was going to go. And with that individual, I found lobbyists could be extremely effective in being able to get what it was that they wanted, so long as they remain loyal. Loyalty became a big key to that person. It was much more important than long-term merit. I've always believed that loyalty is important, and it's one of the more important things, except honor. Your honor should be above loyalty. You should try to make certain that you're trying to do the right thing. And I can't tell you that every time I was there, I did. I tried my best, but there were times I look back on it and I go, I'm not sure I made that decision for the right reason. But with this group of people that enjoy the pain, merit, they don't see merit. They see it quite simply as a zero-sum game where they're either going to get an advantage and hurt someone who is their enemy, or someone else is going to get the advantage over them and hurt them. They just see the game that clearly. And interestingly enough, the worst wasn't the politicians. Again, if you look at the numbers, about 1% of the public is considered to be psychopathic or less. There are studies that think that it can be around 4% for people who are in business. Well, that's almost 1 in 20. In my experience in politics, it's about 1 in 10. But worse than the politicians were advocacy groups. Now, there were great advocacy groups that did great work, and they accomplished great goals, and there were really good people in it. But you would see these people who would go into advocacy that oftentimes had that dark triad that we've talked about in the past. They wanted to inflict pain. They themselves saw themselves as a victim. They had seen the pain that they had incurred or the people that they support. And it wasn't enough to fight you on the issue, to fight you over the merits of the issue. When they got done, if you weren't going to be on their side, they wanted to inflict severe pain. And so they would spend time looking into your personal life, your children's lives, your, what had happened in your family, anything you can to make you suffer, and also to make you recognize that you cannot be against them. And, that personality trait, what I find most people do is they try to find a way to ignore them, try to find a way to avoid them. But when they get to them, they can be very effective. The fact that they act that way make a lot of people afraid of them. Now, my own personal opinion is, and I've said this to a number of my colleagues when we would confront people like that, if you give in to them now, you will give in to them on everything. So you might as well take the pain up front and just let them know, no, we're not going to do that with you. We're not going to play that game.
And it can be so hard to stand up against them. Just like you were saying, like you're having to think about like your own honor and morality and code of ethics. And especially if you see like, hey, they may be able to help me get this thing done. It might be there might be more advantages for me to align myself with them. And so this is interesting. It goes back to the Philip Zimbardo study and a lot of his research and work in saying the seductiveness of power resides in us all. We can think that we're immune to it, but we're not. And we're constantly confronted with it. Every decision we have to make. And we have to be better than that. We have to rise above it. And in order to do that, we have to have the insight. We have to have the awareness. We have to have the knowledge. We have to know what drives us. We have to know what is influencing our thought process and our behaviors and our emotional reasoning. Because it may take 10 years and then we're looking back on our lives and thinking, how did I get here?
For the most part, the people who came into politics they had this idea that they could make the world better. And when they got there, that's what they tried to do. Now, for the most part, most of them found out very quickly that the one issue that they thought was the most important when they ran for office, that there were 1,000 issues that you had to deal with. So if you ran for city council because you thought that we needed to deal with the water problem, well, when you get there, you find you have neighborhood zoning disputes, you have private property rights, you have to deal with freeways, you have to deal with water lines that have to be built, floodways that have to be taken care of, the crime problem. You start to find out that the problem's more complex. Now, that also is part of what makes it fun. But what you start to see over time is in the beginning, again, most people go there and they just want to try to do the right thing, but they're not as informed as they might be. The downside to people who become more informed is they start to see the decisions less from a merit standpoint. And again, not everyone, but there's a factor here that's at play where it just starts to become another thing that they have to make a decision on. And the merit matters less than the power itself. Where does this take me from a power standpoint? So on that, you'll start to see people who say, well, I want to do a trade. All right, you want me to vote for this freeway. I want you to vote against this zoning case. You want me to vote for the zoning case. I want you to vote for this water project that's going to be in my district. Now, I found that to be problematic. I would always have a conversation with people when they did that when I was mayor, and I would go around and talk to them. I'd say, look, I don't do that, because if I do that and I do a trade-off with you, then you're going to know that I do trade-offs with other people. And then you're going to think on every deal there's some trade-off that you weren't privy to, and you're going to be suspicious of me. So the better answer is this. I want you to vote for this because it's meritorious. But if you don't, just tell me why you think it's not meritorious, and let me see if I can fix that problem. And then I'm going to do the same thing for you. You can talk about your water project. You can talk to me about why it's meritorious. I'm going to tell you why I think that it's not. And then you can try to convince me based upon that merit. I found my power was much greater doing that than actually trying to cut deals. But deals are about power, and it's about empowering yourself. And once you get really good at being the deal maker, your power quotient goes extremely high. Again, I see people utilize that all the time to climb the ladder. We, in our book, Addictive Ideologies, what we saw with Saddam Hussein was he figured out how to climb the ladder. when he first was able to bring the Ba'ath Party to power, what he was telling the public at that time was that they needed a pan-Arab state, meaning what they wanted to do was to make certain that they created this one pan-Arab world so that the Arab community, which was a large portion of population in the world, when they got together, they would be more powerful. Of course, what it was really driven by is that Sunnis were the majority of Arabs in the world, but yet in Iraq, Sunnis were the minority. So the thought was, hey, if we create this one Arab world, the Sunnis are going to gain power, even though we're a minority in Iraq. But it never failed. Almost every single one of the countries that advocated for a pan-Arab world, the minute the leader got into power, based upon that concept, they ditched it.
Yeah.
Right? They ditched it because it was never about a one pan-Arab world. It was about the individual who was attempting to get that space or attempting to get that power, what they wanted. And what you begin to see with them is that the things that drive them are getting power. So they have a set of tools. By the way, there's a really good series people should watch on Netflix. It's called How to Become a Tyrant. It's just exceptional at it. But what you begin to see there are these traits that begin to take place. So the first thing that happens is that you need to convince people that I see your pain and I know who you resent and I'm going to help you get even with them. Man, that is a shortcut. If you can help people identify, that's right. If I can figure out who you're mad at and then inspire you to be even more angry at them, more angry than you are now. If I know that you're suspicious of a group, you're suspicious of the wealthy, or you're suspicious of immigrants, or you're suspicious of Jewish people, or you're suspicious of Arabs, it doesn't matter. If I play on that fear and make it bigger than it is, then I can begin to help you believe that we can get even with them together.
Yeah, or even selling people on a very simple message at a time that they may be experiencing more despair or feeling a sense of inequality or injustice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened with the Nazi regime rising to power. It became they offered a very simple message and vilified the Jewish population. It was an ideal opportunity economically for them to just exterminate Jews at that time and take over whatever it is that they owned and whatever wealth or status that they had. There no longer was this competitive force in the population. Same thing happened with Saddam Hussein rising to power. A lot of Jews who owned farms or owned a state or and even they were so careful not to, and yet being there for so many generations, it's a natural thing to want to build something, a legacy for your family. Those were the people who were targeted the most, my grandfather being included.
Yeah, so what happens too is, and by the way, this is very similar to what I saw, is that the people who want power, again, this is my hypothesis, it's not been vetted out in any way, but my hypothesis is there are people who want power for influence and there are people who want power to hurt people. That second type, all right, they're driven by a whole different set of aims. And the reason why the pain, they enjoy it so much is because it makes them feel more powerful. It gives them a sense of power that's unique. It's not lost on me that Saddam said in the beginning of the formation of the Ba'ath Party that he was going to allow someone else to lead, and instead he took over the administrative duties of being involved with security. Now, he actually promoted on purpose that he was just an administrator, a paper pusher, that he had no real power. But he had incredible power. In fact, as we know, the people who were torturing people like your family members not only were related to Saddam's agency, Saddam himself actually had torture parties. And so the question is, why would he do that? Or why would he do it? Well, one was wealth. It shouldn't be lost on people. Saddam went into office broke. When he left, he had over $2 billion. Right? He gained that wealth through a variety of means. Now, some of that was when he actually got into power. He was able to effectuate trade and benefited himself. He was able to effectuate commerce that was going on in his community and benefited himself. But in the
It's all
beginning,
stolen.
he always stole it. I think they call it a kleptocracy.
Yes.
You know, he created an environment where he could rob people. And so with your grandfather, when he disappeared, the reason that you can't find him anywhere on the rolls is because they were able to convince him to sign off everything he had, give up all the things that he had, show them where the wealth was, and then having him be put on trial wasn't going to benefit them.
No, he had to disappear.
He had to disappear. So from Saddam's standpoint, that kleptocracy, that ability to steal from people was important because the money gave him wealth. But he showed up for some of the torturing. We know he personally had torture parties. Well, if you were just a decent leader, just wanted to steal from people, gosh, you could have other people go do that for you. There are other people in there who have the willingness and the desire to go do it. He wanted to do it himself. It's because he enjoyed the torture. He enjoyed the pain. That pain in itself was a form of power.
And it sends an important message if you want to remain a tyrant and rule through fear, that he will not stop at any means possible. He will. I think it was his first night in office that he had the gathering of all these different officials and
Sixth day.
Yeah. One by one, led them outside. Anyone who was part of any kind of opposition or opposition party or maybe knew too much about him.
By the way, you can watch that video online. You can watch the video from beginning to end. It was on the 6th day of him taking power after he told his cousin, hey, it's time for you to step down, and basically threatened him that if he didn't, he was going to lose his life. He steps into power. He walks up in front of an entire congregation of hundreds of people that were in his party that helped him get to where it was that he wanted to get to. He lights a cigar. He has that almost branded Cheshire grin that he had, and he announces to them that there have been people who have been a traitor to him, that haven't been helpful. Again, he's only now been in office 6 days, but he says that group of people, we now have someone who's going to admit to it. And he brought in one of the people that had opposed him. That individual that we know now that they terrorized him, threatened to rape and kill his daughter and his wife in front of him if he wasn't willing to go up and talk about in front of this group who actually were the traitors to Saddam. So this guy gets up to start announcing who those traitors were. Saddam never lost that joyful smile he had. Again, watch the video. You can Google it online. When you see him, he's enjoying this. And as the guy announced people one at a time, they stood up and screamed and tried to deny it, but they were in fear because they knew how much trouble they were in. And all of a sudden the guards would go down and pick them up and take them outside. And they did that one at a time.
And
20 of them. Assassinated them on the spot. Right. Now, what does that do? It takes everyone else, and they begin to know what you'll do to hang on to power. The challenge with most tyrants in that type of a position is that they know that they're constantly being threatened. They know that there are other people who, given the chance, will kill them to take their power.
Yeah, and it could even be people who were loyal to them but knew too much, or knew how they got to power, or knew their weaknesses.
Yeah, and
knew enough information that could harm them.
And we are, we're seeing that today. We're seeing that today with Xi and Putin. Xi, it shouldn't be lost on people. This is a guy who wants to create what he calls a new order, and it's going to be a Chinese-led order in his mind. He believes that the American world order is problematic for them and wants to debunk it. Although it also shouldn't be lost on people that we brought them in. We brought them in during the Cold War and offered them the ability to sell product into the United States, to use our financial system, to use our Navy to be able to secure their product. And now he wants to basically overthrow it. But why? Right? The answer is because they're becoming imperial and they know that they have long-term economic problems. And the only way they can make up for that is to become imperial. But Xi started his administration. I mean, this is a guy who, like Saddam, has a becoming look to him. When you see him, you just don't see the evil inside of him. But he immediately, after coming into power, began to eliminate people who were his opposition. He has been isolated now. No one there will say anything bad to Xi because they understand what the penalty of that is. And what that begins to mean is they only hear information from people that builds on that whole sense of them being right, of grandiosity, of what it is that only they can do, and why it is that their enemies are worthy of being disposed of. Now, in our book, when we talk about ideologies, the whole goal of that is to try to get people to understand that what ideologies really do inside of each one of us is good and evil. It's very easy for us to look at those politicians that we were just talking about and say, they're the problem. The truth is, in all of us, there's some good and some evil. And there are politicians who are driven more by pain. But they utilize ideology as a means to pull you in. And then once you gain that ideology and you begin to say, well, here's what we believe, and this person opposes us, so they must be evil because as a group we're good. And then you can begin to justify the acts that have to take place to be able to keep that ideology prevalent.
So I have a question for you. For most people that I talk to about these different case analyses, including my family's story and Jewish history and the diaspora and Holocaust, and also genocides across the world, in Rwanda, with the Hutus and the Tutsis, and the Bosnian War and concentration camps and horrific genocide that occurred there. People often respond, especially in the U.S., that just happens over there. I'm more concerned about, my family. I'm more concerned about my business. I'm more concerned about my competitive edge. I'm, concerned about these other things. And so sometimes I feel like these issues that we're discussing, they're important to me and you, but they're not necessarily of importance to general people that I talk to. Like, what might be a helpful message? And we're also here on the Optimistic American Show. It doesn't sound so optimistic so far. But what message would you have to our listeners who have that kind of sentiment?
So the single greatest thing about our society, I've been involved in government and I watched us do many, many great things. Build roads, bridges, dams, build schools, universities, and put people on the moon. But the single greatest thing that our government ever did is it empowered the individual over itself. That was amazing. In empowering the individual, we created a society where we have many, many more points of being able to make human progress, because it's not just government that's doing it. It's the private sector. It's individuals. And we've seen that continue to develop. The challenge is that there are groups who want us to move back to more of an authoritarian type state. It's the people who are promoting groups. If you promote white nationalism, or if you promote on the other side the evils of the patriarchy, what you're really doing is you're trying to advance a group, and you believe that it's okay to harm the other side, to advance the idea that the patriarchy is always evil, as if every single white male must be evil. You're willing to do that because the group to you is more important than the individual. Well, that's not what our society was built upon. Our society has built and evolved into something that empowered the individual because we understood the importance of it. For you to be successful at that, you have to have agency. And to have agency, goal number one on the hierarchy of agency, if you go to our website, you can find the hierarchy, and you can also see it in our book more further described. But what we know is that you have to start by knowing the truth. And the truth is not nearly as bleak as what you will read or what you will see. The reason for us having this conversation today, in my opinion, is so that people can understand, hey, there are people that will manipulate you. Get used to it. And unfortunately, there are people, even in a democracy, that will try to manipulate you. The easiest way not to be manipulated is to go beyond what you're watching on the nightly news, go beyond what you're hearing from your politicians or your political parties, and start looking for what are the things to be optimistic about. What you've said in the analysis that you've given us is that unless you do that, if you continue to remain afraid, that amygdala hijack takes place and it overpowers the neocortex. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yes. We are driven by different emotions, and emotional reasoning can sometimes override logic. And when that happens, it's usually because we're driven by fear or these other impulses. And so we can't really discern what's happening to us and make clear decisions consciously and logically, rationally, with a reasonable degree of understanding and appreciation of all the facts in front of us, that information that we have available to us at the time, if we're run by fear. And con artists know this. So the psychology of con artists is to sell something like, if you don't say yes in this next 3 seconds, you're going to lose this amazing opportunity. Or this other horrible thing is going to happen. You're going to lose $10,000 because somebody's broken into your account, your bank account. And so you have to give me all this security information in order for me to then salvage your account to ensure that you don't lose that $10,000. So in that moment, people can't think rationally. They think, oh, somebody hacked into my account. I'm going to lose $10,000. Here's my social security number, my date of birth, and where I live, and all this other information, which even people who are trained and knowledgeable and informed know not to do, and yet they still do it in those situations because we're driven by fear and anxiety and, oh my gosh, what could this mean? And people also sound like psychologists. They learn to sound like police officers. They learn to look like authority figures. And so when you do that, people assume, well, they're credible. But no, they're impersonators.
And so, spoiler alert for our book. All right, what is it really about? All right, Addictive Ideologies. Yes, it starts with talking about Saddam Hussein. And you'll see when you go through this that there are things that are eerily similar to what's happening in American society today. But you'll also, if you're informed, would recognize there are still vast differences. But when you start looking at who's to blame for the road that we're headed down, here's the spoiler. The spoiler is we are. All right, people want to blame Joe Biden or Donald Trump or some politician or the news media. And I have problems with actually everyone that I just mentioned in some way, shape, or form. But the answer is we're accountable. We can make a difference. And if we begin to regain our sense of agency, if we know the truth and we understand that we're an individual in a society that is based on individuals, one that's worthy of keeping, and we begin to understand that by releasing those things inside of you that are special, you're going to have a better life. And in you having a better life, we're going to have a better country. When you make improvements in your own life and you help your children, your family, your friends, you help your customers, you're actually doing a very patriotic thing, because we're a society that's based upon empowering you as an individual. And when you as an individual then can help other people, it helps promote the whole concept of who we are. The spoiler, though, is you have to take accountability for yourself. Instead of looking at them and pointing at them and you say, well, look at all the terrible things that they do to divide us. Ask this question: what are you doing to divide us? I've had to face that. What have I done to divide us? Well, I can remember once telling one of my brothers, who was a Marine, served very honorably inside the U.S. Marine Corps, but was kind of avid in his political views. And he made a comment one day that was just completely wrong. And I said, well, where did you get that from? Fox? Well, here's the real question. Forget about where he got that from. Why did I say that? I said that to
degrade him.
To degrade him, to diminish him. I didn't make it better.
Yeah.
I made it worse.
You wanted to just say, I'm right and you're wrong because of the information you're basing this on is false.
And it wasn't fair to Fox. It wasn't fair to the people who watch Fox, and it wasn't fair to him.
Yeah.
But again, if I'm accountable for myself.
It was a quick, deliberate job.
Yeah. And in politics, we learn that. And with family, we learn that.
As with sibling.
And the real answer that I should have gotten to was asking him, why does he feel that way? What does he think that we could do to make that better? And try to understand his point of view. And maybe, if I asked him enough questions, he might become interested in what I had to say. Maybe he wouldn't. And if he didn't, that's okay. Quit insulting the people that you love for people you don't even know, people that won't even call you back.
Yeah, my question then would be, so for the individual, if I was talking to an individual client, I would think, what do you have to measure yourself against that lets you know that you're at least going in that right direction, that we're encouraging people with these ideals? And how do you constantly measure against that? Because it can sound so ambiguous and vague, and we're putting these like lofty ideals out there. Um, and one of the things that I tell to populations, especially if they're struggling with substance use addictions, is look for complacency. Because as soon as you're complacent, that's a risk factor. As soon as you're no longer avidly working in recovery, that's a risk factor. As soon as you think you've got this and you can let things slide by and no longer on top of your game and no longer talking to your sponsor, going to meetings and being really active in your engagement in recovery, those are all risk factors. And so be aware of complacency. I think the same thing still works if we're trying to measure that up against, look at what is your responsibility civically. And again, are you complacent? I think in general, I think people are really tired and they're feeling distrustful of politics and politicians. And they really are just trying to go back to living their lives. And I wanted to just briefly touch on a really fascinating experiment that Stanley Milgram did in the 1960s. This was following the trial in the Nuremberg trials of Adolf Eichmann, who was considered the principal architect of the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, and who established the final solution. And extermination of Jews. And Milgram was really interested in the early 1960s at seeing, is this obedience? Is everyone just really about conformity and obedience? Because they were seeing that a lot of people who were on trial were saying, well, I was just following the rules. Like, this wasn't necessarily my design.
Eichmann's argument, or the people, the banality of evil was written about Eichmann just being a cog in the wheel.
Yeah. And so, going back to, well, what is my responsibility in this? And is there a diffusion of responsibility if you're put into a situation to make some kind of decisions? Ultimately, with this study, they put different people in positions where they were having to produce electric shocks to a person who was in a learner position. And if the learner didn't produce the right answer, the subject had to produce electric shocks. And so they had the opportunity to go up to 450 volts, which was like extreme danger. And at that point, as they were approaching 450 volts, they would hear the learner screaming as they were increasing incrementally to higher voltages, and then to a point where they would just hear nothing from the learner, so assuming that maybe they were dead. And they still continued. So they found that 2/3 of the subjects in this experiment continued to produce enough shocks that would ultimately potentially kill the learner. And they did this because a person who was in the experimenter role had a lab coat and said, for the sake of this experiment, you must go on. And they had different prompts that they would say to just constantly encourage them that this was important. And the experimenter would take full responsibility for whatever happened. So there's that diffusion of responsibility to the learner. And so Milgram then looked at, well, okay, people are just mass conformists and obedient to people in positions of authority. What we later learned is that this was conducted at Yale University. It was advertised as a really important contribution to the scientific community. People felt like they were contributing something meaningfully to science.
There were also over 30 different studies that were done, and some of them had no compliance, and some of them had extremely high compliance, which suggests that maybe the person that they were working with had a big effect on them. And my answer to that is, well, first, I think Eichmann was evil. I mean, if you read enough about Eichmann, he wasn't just an administrator. When he wrote the final solution, I think he had incredible evil in his heart. I think there were a lot of people who helped put that together who were just maybe trying to comply with the sense of authority. And there are lessons that we can take from that. One lesson is we all know the power of peer pressure. All of us know that. The question becomes, hey, how can we gain our own sense of agency where we're not following someone just simply because they look like the authority figure? Now, good news, probably the United States, we defy authority probably more than anyone else anywhere else in the world, right? When we get mad about all these different groups that are out there, that one of the good things is it's kind of within our nature. The downside is be careful of the group you're following. Be careful of the side that you're following, especially if somebody comes in with that dark triad of personality traits and begins to manipulate them. You won't know you're being manipulated. You'll just think that the authority inside your tribe says do X, Y, Z. And the better answer is be your own tribe.
So how does this play into counterculture or cancel culture? Sorry.
So I think it plays into cancel culture. And thus, first, there are people who have those personality traits who want to hurt people. The internet has given them an incredible power to be able to do that. Their goal is that they'll usually have a cause that they're trying to promote. And that cause that they're trying to promote, they'll find someone that they think is evil. And then they'll use terms like racism or bigotry or homophobia or whatever word that they want to be able to put a tag on them that will help them with their audience. In my experience, that is exactly the type of advocate that I'm talking about. And they are disproportionately, not all of them, but disproportionately, they have the dark triad of traits. In fact, there are some studies now that we know that have looked very specifically at this, and they found that when you do the test, there's what they call the politically correct authoritarians, as opposed to just politically correct liberals. Politically correct liberals don't like you using words that they think are harmful to another person because they're empathetic. But the politically correct authoritarian, they go way beyond that. It's not just about saying, hey, that's not the nice thing to say. It's about destroying your reputation. The people who are doing that, almost always, it's not always, but almost always, there's somebody driving the boat who loves the power of pain. They love the power of being able to hurt people. And once they get the high from doing it, they'll find another target, and then another, and then another, because it gives them a sense of power over that individual.
And I think that there's a lot of resentment driving it. If you were to look at uncovering it, I know you were saying they're driven by pain or inflicting pain, but I think part of that is that they're driven by vengeance and resentment.
Yeah, I think there's a whole politics of resentment. Again, let's come back to our book, Addictive Ideologies. What helps you?
Yeah.
As an individual, what's helpful to you? And here's the answer. Being negative is not going to help you. It's not going to help. You will lose opportunities from having a negative outlook in life. If you're a pessimist, you will lose opportunities. If you harbor resentment, if you're angry, not only will you lose, you're a sucker for somebody to be able to recruit to get to do something that you wouldn't normally otherwise do. Give those things up. Move away from them and start looking at how can you be creative? How can you be innovative? How can you participate? How can you make a difference in your lives, your children's lives, your family's lives? What are the things that you can do to contribute back to society or to understand that it's we, not me, that you're part of something bigger? If you are willing to let go of those things that are harmful, those negative attributes, it doesn't mean that you then say, well, now you're going to be Pollyannish and you're not going to recognize the problems. You can be optimistic and still recognize the problems. In fact, the people who are going to solve those problems are the people who believe that you can. That's being optimistic. Our book is about if you become accountable for yourself, a big, big part of the problem starts to go away.
Yeah, and it empowers the person and gives them the ability to see things that I think they wouldn't ultimately be able to see if they remained in that victim role.
All right. Well, Dr. Bashah, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey. I've really enjoyed writing the book with you. Again, people, I think, if people are interested, they can pick up the book on Amazon or any one of a number of other sites that they might be interested in getting it. But thank you for being here, and thanks for your contribution to the Optimistic American.
Thank you, Paul.